being said, that Alabama had its defense questioned mightily in the win against Ole Miss, but a game in Oxford in which the Rebels moved the ball with ease. And people said that there is the end of the Alabama defense. And the truth is that Alabama at least somewhat answered the bell defensively the following week against Georgia and then on the way towards eventually winning a national championship. So when Alabama has been questioned about its defense before, it's answered that to the tune of still figuring out a way to win the national title. But here we are in 2021, knowing that these same kinds of questions are being asked again. It kind of makes you wonder, the fact that this is a trend that renews itself so frequently, what really is going on here? And at a certain point, is Alabama incapable of answering the call on all of this? It's one of the things I think that makes the Iron Bowl really interesting on Saturday. There have been continual moments this year where a lot of us, myself included, I'm not an Alabama fan. I am a Georgia fan, and I don't make any apologies about that. I'm willing to tell you that up front here in this discussion. But there have been a lot of moments this year where I think we keep waiting for Alabama to be Alabama. And as of yet, they just haven't done that. Does that start to change this Saturday in the Iron Bowl against Auburn? And does that become a little bit of a preview of what might be in store for the SEC championship, where Alabama finally shows some merit on defense that it hasn't found a way to be able to show all season long? I'm Brandon Adams, and this is SEC Country Live. We're going to turn our attention to the Florida Gators here. We're going to talk to Pat Dooley. In fact, we'll go ahead and get Pat on the phone right now, get ready to chat with him about the ongoing rumors and discussion about the Florida head coaching job. While we're getting Pat on the phone, though, I do want to show you this. Bob Stoops, the former Florida defensive coordinator, who's obviously been such a respected figure around college football, and one of those guys because he has the previous ties to the program there in Gainesville, who also is going to show up anytime there's a major coaching opening, and at Florida maybe more likely than other places that Stoops' name would come up here. Well, he was asked about the job there being open at Florida. Would he consider himself a candidate for that? Let me show you on the screen what Bob Stoops had to say about that. He says, "I love what I'm doing with TV. I enjoy watching my son play and the Sooners. I'm not looking to get into that job." Bob Stoops apparently said on the radio here today, saying that Florida is one of the best jobs out there, though, and he has got great memories of his time there as defensive coordinator, but not considering himself a candidate for that job. That's Matt Ravis, who writes that, of course, Sports Animal, sports radio station in Oklahoma, where Stoops apparently says these things, denying his interest in that job. And if that's the case, if Bob Stoops really isn't a candidate for the Florida job right now, I think the thing you're left to wonder is, well, are there then big names who Florida could pursue that would get the entirety of the Florida fan base excited? We've obviously, heard a lot of chatter as of late about Billy Napier, the fact that there seems to be some media discussion ongoing right now that Florida's moving fast and trying to get Napier, trying to beat maybe a school like Virginia Tech that might also be interested in him. Napier's obviously done very good things at Louisiana Lafayette. He's had success there, enough to get Florida's attention and enough to create a little bit of a race potentially for Napier's services. And what you can't quite know is, and it'll be certainly curious to see what Florida fans say in response to all this, is Napier a big enough name to generate excitement in the fan base? Admittedly, there was a lot of restlessness around the Florida program over the course of this year with some of the struggles defensively and kind of what goes down with Todd Grantham there. And, just the losses that piled up for Florida over the course of that time together. The fact there was so much of that, the Florida fans were restless, so maybe any new blood all the way around becomes the kind of thing that maybe gets Florida fans more excited. But if your comparison for a guy like Napier is a guy like Bob Stoops that had won a national championship, had been a fixture at Oklahoma, a big enough name that he's a big-time analyst now on the Fox network, that you almost wonder if Napier suffers in comparison to that just because Stoops is such a big name. So we'll find out more about the Florida coaching search here in a moment when we bring on Pat Dooley, who obviously has covered that program for a long time. We'll talk to him about that. And I'd actually love to hear from some Florida fans on today's show to weigh in with your thoughts on exactly where you'd like to see Florida go with this, and if you think that Napier has the potential to be an upgrade over what Dan Mullen was for this program. Seemingly the chance of being a better recruiter, it'd be hard to be worse. Obviously, that was not an aspect of the job that Mullen really embraced. But the problem is when you go out and get the hot group of 5 name, I mentioned before the Virginia Tech opening, at one point in time, Justin Fuente would have been that hot name at Memphis, and he obviously did not work out at Virginia Tech. That sometimes you go out and get the guy from outside the major conferences, and it turns out to be Urban Meyer. And then sometimes you go out and get that guy, as in the case of Virginia Tech, and it turns out to be Justin Fuente, who kind of goes back into the heap of relatively anonymous coaches. That's just kind of the way that sometimes this goes, and still way too soon to see how that might go when it all comes down to Billy Napier there, if that is indeed the name that Florida targets and goes after. But interesting a moment ago to hear Bob Stoops say that no, right now he does not consider himself to be a candidate for that job. So we'll get Pat Dooley on the phone. We'll talk to him about that. Also want to talk to you in the comments section here as well today on SEC Country Live, and we appreciate you being here. Adam Underwood, not impressed with Dan Mullen right now, saying that he needs to be a high school assistant coach at best. So Adam, not a fan of what Dan Mullen did there at the University of Florida. Daryl Luter checking in here, feeling pretty good going back to 2012. He says in 2012, Alabama lost to Texas A&M, then went on to win the national championship. He says history is going to repeat itself here this year with that. So interesting stuff. Billy Deeds on the subject, I think, of the Florida Gators here, saying that we need an SEC coach. In other words, saying a little bit concerned about going out and hiring a guy like Napier for Florida if a guy like that doesn't have those SEC ties. I think that's an interesting comment to read there from Billy. He says, kind of weighing in there on that. Danny McCullers also checking in there as well. He says, we're going to see Saban game plan Georgia aggressively. If straight up Georgia dominates on offense and defense, Saban a big underdog, it's going to be interesting. I don't know that Alabama's a big underdog in the SEC championship, but certainly there's every reason to believe it will be an underdog. And as recently as October 30th, that probably wasn't true. If you do a comparative point spread for Georgia against Florida when they played on a neutral site compared to when Alabama had gone to Florida earlier in the season, you had reason to believe on the basis of those comparative scores, comparative spreads, that Alabama would have still been a favorite over Georgia as recently as the end of October. That's obviously changed now to the point where Georgia's probably around a field goal favorite. There's some look-ahead lines that have Georgia's about a 4 or 4.5 point favorite. So one way or another, that probably settles in with Georgia being a little bit of a slight favorite there against Alabama. And as you said before, not just game planning to get ready for Georgia, but also doing so with the players now dealing with that little extra motivation of knowing they've been highly doubted, and that the way in which Alabama has played on the defensive side of the football has turned out to be highly suspicious, and folks are asking big questions about them. Billy Deeds also says Lane Kiffin is the guy that checks all the boxes for Florida. I think the problem with that, though, is from the rumor standpoint, you just don't see that train leaving the station right now. That's not really getting off the ground very much. I did see where Paul Feinbaum kind of floated the name of Lane Kiffin to Florida, but he's really been about the only guy, and you haven't seen a lot of substance form around that. I don't know if this is related to Florida being a pretty traditional conservative bent type program. I don't mean politically. I mean more in the traditional vein, that maybe the extracurricular stuff that's gone on with Lane Kiffin's a little too much for them, or if this is just an example of if Kiffin really is looking to make a move, that a place like Miami is just really more to his liking. South Florida, a place where he still has a home, a place where he once coached, that's just more to his liking. You can decide for yourself which is which, but for right now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of substance to the rumors, connecting Lane Kiffin to Florida. Does not seem like that's growing very much right now. A few more comments here. David Kendall checking in on some LSU coaching rumors. We're actually going to talk more about the LSU situation before our show is done today, because there does seem to be a pretty substantial rumor growing around that program, and also involves a last name that we've already mentioned on today's show. So we'll deal with that here in a little bit there too. Adam Underwood says, why was Mullen even in Florida anyway? He was at Miss State, and he couldn't even win when he was there. So obviously some folks kind of rethinking the Mullen era at Mississippi State right now. Steve Crawley says, Bama better get that defense going or there's no championship this year. And certainly that was the message coming from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee on Tuesday night. That is certainly true. More comments continue to roll through him there as well. A lot of folks going to share their thoughts on what's going on. Kyle Cummings says you better get ready for Bryce Young to count some lights. So he's feeling pretty good about Georgia putting Bryce Young on his back for the SEC championship. That's kind of nice. Jeff Davis says that Chris Lowe, the ESPN reporter, says that he knows Kiffin pretty well and thinks he'd be spectacular at Florida, and he might be. Certainly he brings that offensive firepower, that ability to cultivate attention for himself. Those are all things that Kiffin's really pretty good at doing. But as I said, it's difficult to tell if this is one of those scenarios where Kiffin has his sights set on other jobs, or if Florida's just not quite so sure wants to get in the Lane Kiffin business. There is some baggage there. This is a guy that wore out his welcome as Alabama offensive coordinator. This is a guy that, obviously left Tennessee high and dry after a year. This is a guy that just hasn't exactly been, all that consistent, all that willing to stick around anywhere for a particularly long time. He's a guy that wears out welcomes pretty fast, that seems to burn out pretty quick. That just seems to kind of be his story with all of that. And yet, he continues to be a hot name because of the fact that he also, while he takes controversy with him seemingly everywhere he goes, he also takes a lot of interest there too. And, to a place like Ole Miss or a place like Tennessee, that's what you really need. Florida, I think, as a program, feels like it already has enough attention. They just need a guy who can win, especially after 2-3 failed administrations in a row. Will Muschamp recruited well but couldn't win enough games. Jim McElwain and Dan Mullen weren't particularly good recruiters at all. This is 3 coaches in a row for Florida that all of a sudden make the glory days of Urban Meyer or the glory days of Steve Spurrier start to feel a long time ago. So all of that is a very much big part of this discussion. So apparently we're having a little bit of a hard time getting in touch with Pat Dooley right now, so we'll see if we can figure that out. And if we're able to connect with Pat, then we'll do that coming up here in just a little bit. Let me also give a shout out to my friends at Meriwether and Tharp right now. I tell you about them all the time. And, of course, this Thanksgiving time of year and really the entirety of the holiday season can really bring about, for many of us, pleasant feelings, and we love that. We love being with those that we love. But for strained relationships, for those that may be on the rocks, sometimes the holiday season can only exacerbate that further. And we understand that, and that's why I think a lot of you are feeling probably pretty stressed out right now. And if that's the case, I'm sorry. But here's what I can tell you, that wherever you are around the SEC country landscape, in any of the states that would be watching SEC Country Live right now, my friends at Meriwether and Tharp, though they're based in Atlanta, though they're based here in the state of Georgia, can be a real resource for you about the law in all of the states that are tuned in to watch us right now. That's what Meriwether and Tharp is great at, free resources to help educate you about the divorce process. You have questions about the divorce process, Meriwether and Tharp has answers. They are your source for Georgia divorce and across SEC country there as well. So check them out online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. So we've done a couple of things on the show today. If you're just joining us, we talked about Alabama, where they fell in the college football playoff rankings last night and kind of what that means to the Crimson Tide going forward. We also talked a little bit about some Florida coaching rumors, including Bob Stoops denying any kind of interest in on that right now. And we'll get ready here in a few moments to also take a look at some of the games coming up this weekend from a point spread perspective, from a gambling perspective. That's going to be a really fun thing to get a chance to do, and we'll look forward to being able to do that then. We'll also get ready to check in here with the show on YouTube. We'll take some YouTube comments, and that's always a nice thing to be able to do. Hope the YouTube folks are having a good time today. Jay Shipe says Kiffin wouldn't go to Florida. It's a downgrade from Ole Miss there on that. So not quite sure.
May the force be with you.
We're getting a little bit of stuff kind of coming in here a little bit, but getting a little bit of audio feedback here coming in. But Jay Shipe says Kiffin wouldn't go to Florida. It's a downgrade from Ole Miss. Obviously, he's having some fun there. Georgia fan kind of making fun of that Florida job there a little bit. That's kind of fun to see. Foster Moss also checking in there too, so he's having a good time there in the YouTube comment section right now. We appreciate all of these YouTube comments that continue to roll through. Mike Jones gives you a happy Thanksgiving with the turkey leg emoji. That's certainly great, and I know all of you getting ready to enjoy a great Thanksgiving coming up, and I certainly appreciate that. Brian Whitehead enjoyed the little drop in there of the May the Force be with you, and we'll have some more fun with Eli Drinkwitz here coming up before our show is done here today. Or in Chile, on the subject of who Georgia the number one team right now has or hasn't played thus far. He says, I don't care about who Georgia has played or hasn't. He said, we played who's on our schedule. He says, Arkansas and Clemson in the top 25 last time that I checked. And, yeah, obviously, there are teams that Georgia has played that were ranked when they played them, but in part because of how bad Georgia beat them, those are teams that also fell out of the rankings after that. So I think when you look at the totality of the season, I don't think Georgia has any apologies right now for just how good that it's been. It has obviously dominated to the point where there's almost just very little left to say. Now, I think the one thing that is a fair discussion point, and we'll obviously do a lot of this certainly next week ahead of the SEC championship, one of the things that I think is very much a fair discussion point right now is Georgia going to be able to exploit all those things that Kirk Herbstreit or Playoff Selection Committee, that they say the things they say they see as a vulnerability for Alabama? Is Georgia going to be good enough to exploit those offensively? Now, the numbers and the statistics would say, yes, they are. Georgia has been among the more efficient offense in the entire country, averaging nearly 40 points per game. The numbers for Stetson Bennett are strong. The numbers per play for Georgia across the board are strong there as well. But perhaps because Georgia's doing it in a way that looks different than you would have thought at the beginning of the season, injuries at wide receiver, initial injury to JT Daniels before Daniels finally gave way to Stetson Bennett, I think there remains this curiosity of, well, can Georgia really do this in a big game? Certainly, week after week, Georgia hasn't failed to score at least 30 points since the season opener versus Clemson. But some of that, just knowing that Georgia has a little bit of a track record of trying to figure things out on offense, and that being a little bit of an Achilles heel in the past, until some folks see that in the big game from Georgia, they're just not going to stop asking that question. So that's just kind of what's out there right now. And I think that Oren with his comment is correct, that Georgia's just plowed over every team it's had a chance to play. But nonetheless, there are still going to be some of those doubters out there until Georgia goes out there and proves that. Danny McCullers says, fundamentally, Georgia's got it all. He says, no way we should win unless some choking under pressure happens. So I think he means that from the standpoint of an Alabama fan, that when you look at what Georgia has going for it on the field, that's an Alabama fan that says right now this might be Georgia's season to win with all of that. So we'll keep these conversations going. We're also going to get David Wasson on the phone here. We'll get an update on the big games across the SEC from a point spread perspective with our friends at BetUS. We'll do that with David coming up here right now. John Paul Gilmore checks in to say that Bama's offense is better than Georgia's, but Georgia's defense is better than Bama's. It's going to be an interesting game. Yeah, you see this a lot, and there's definitely kind of a strength on one side of the ball where the Alabama offense has been terrific against the Georgia defense, which has been historically good. Whereas on the other side of the action, you have the perceived vulnerabilities. Now, in the case of Georgia and its offense, those perceived vulnerabilities really are more about perception than anything else, because numerically, statistically, metrically, Georgia's clearly been very good on offense, but some people almost doubt what their own eyes have seen in that regard. Whereas in Alabama's case, whether it be Arkansas game, LSU game, some of the other games the Tide has played thus far this season, they really have shown themselves to have some issues there on that back end. So obviously it is going to be a tale of two different sides of the ball when it comes to all of that. So let's see what else is happening here in the comment section right now. Always fun to have these great conversations taking place.
I guess everybody's traveling for Thanksgiving.
Yeah. D. Perkins weighs in to say everyone knows when a team comes to play Bama, Bama's always going to get the best of every team. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the case. I guess, D, what some folks are still kind of wondering about, though, here is the best of Alabama going to show up? Because, we kind of wondered that going into last weekend. Similar type of games, ranked Alabama against a ranked Arkansas, ranked Ohio State against a ranked Michigan State. There was that discussion. There was that comparison of, well, which of these two teams is going to really show themselves to be the true playoff contender? And can anybody deny that Alabama clearly failed to do that against Arkansas? Now, Arkansas is a good team. It's a ranked team. This is a team that Georgia beat 37-0. And Alabama went down to the wire in its own stadium with the Razorbacks. Whereas, by comparison, Ohio State was up 49-0 against Michigan State at the half, maybe as dominant a half as the Buckeyes have ever played. So justifiably, Ohio State moves ahead of Alabama in the rankings after last week. And I think a lot of folks are left to wonder now that Ohio State, really a couple of weeks in a row here, Purdue the week before that, a game in which it totally dominated, the Michigan State game last week, that Ohio State now shows the look of being a true playoff contender, whereas in the case of Alabama, they may be among the best teams in the country. That may be the story there, but not really doing the kinds of things late in the season you expect Alabama to kind of separate themselves. We'll get a couple more comments, and then we'll kind of move on here. We've had a little bit of trouble tracking down our telephone guests here on today's show, but we'll see if we can figure all that out here in just a little bit. And if not, we got plenty to talk about with everything else that's happening here. So Scott Rimmer checks in to say that Ohio State lost to Oregon, and it did. I think most of us would say, though, this is a very different version of Ohio State now than it was when it played Oregon. Now, it'll remain somewhat inexplicable how that even happens. That, how is it that an Oregon team going all the way across the country, early body clock game for them, a team that just got blasted by Utah this past week, how'd they even win in Columbus? I think it'll still be somewhat fair to ask that question. But whatever Ohio State was in September, C.J. Stroud has come on. The wide receivers are just as deep as you ever thought they would be. They're starting to play a little bit better defensively, I guess. But the bottom line is they are just throttling people right now in a way they weren't doing as recently even as a few weeks ago. But there is room to trend late in the year. There is room to figure some things out, and just in time here, that might appear to be exactly what Ohio State is doing. And there's still, I think, some room left to figure out if that's what Alabama's going to be able to do as well. Isaac Berry asks a very fair question. He says, do you think that Alabama still gets in if it loses to Georgia? At one point in time, I was of the belief that a 2-loss Alabama team had a shot to do that. But given the fact that they were downgraded this week by the playoff rankings, given the fact that on a week-to-week basis, they're just not showing you a ton, I think the door's a little bit more open for Cincinnati than otherwise would have been. Big 12 champion, a little bit more open there. I mean, listen, I still think that Alabama will get a strong consideration if the game against Georgia's close, but I am less of that belief than maybe I once was. So before we get to championship Saturday, we got rivalry games to think about here this weekend, and it's a great chance for gamblers to make some money, and that's when we start thinking about our friends at BetUS, because they've been taking care of people for such a long time. More than 25 years, they've been really serving folks as America's most beloved sports book, and you don't get to be that way unless you are, as I said before, offering some great incentives for your players, including when you sign up for the very first time. BetUS.com, promo code SEC125. You get the big 125% initial sign-up bonus. That is terrific from our friends at BetUS. And by the way, speaking of BetUS, our buddy David Wasson checks in right now, who follows this kind of stuff closely. Always a great guy to give you some opinions on how it's going to play out with some of these point spreads for the upcoming weekend. David, happy Thanksgiving to you. Thanks for being with us here right now, and looking forward to chatting with you about some of these games.
Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. Listen, it's rivalry week, and that means anything can happen. I'm ready to hash all this out because, records don't always mean a whole lot when it comes to these big games.
Well, maybe an example of that here with the first game I want to talk to you about. The better playoff top 25 ranking belongs to Ole Miss, but they go on the road with Mississippi State on Thursday, Egg Bowl there on Thanksgiving night, and the Bulldogs, despite being the lower-ranked team, are the point spread favorite in their own stadium. Now, Mississippi State's also been hot as of late, and for Ole Miss, maybe there's a question of motivation here with Lane Kiffin being rumored to take other jobs and everything else that's involved. This is one of those games for me where I think a lot of the recent stuff probably argues in favor of Mississippi State, and that's probably in addition to home field advantage why it's favored there on Thursday night. But there's a part of me that still wants to be contrarian in a game like this. Weird things happen in the Egg Bowl. Even though Ole Miss probably been the better team over the course of the season, it feels like the weird result might be Ole Miss bouncing back here on Thursday. Do you have a play here for the Egg Bowl on Thursday night? It's one of my favorite rivalry games of all.
It really is one of mine, too. And although the game hasn't always been great from a overall perspective, it's almost always a competitive game, which is really all you can kind of ask for in college football, is a game that goes to the fourth quarter. This game has always been back and forth. Ole Miss fans hate Mississippi State, and Mississippi State fans hate Ole Miss fans. That's a given. So when you put them together to play for that egg, it's a weird deal. You're right in that, recent history, at least recent history this year, tends to favor Ole Miss in this game. And I think that's why the Rebels are favored. That and being in Kyle Field, you know how loud that place can get when the cowbells going. The SEC has just turned completely the other cheek on those crazy cowbells. It's a weird place to play. However, the Rebels are 1-4 against the spread in their last 5. That is a weird trend for me. That's a weird thing. I think you touched on something else in the introduction to this game. Lane Kiffin, I don't know if he's fueling it. I don't know if he's denying everything. Nevertheless, he's going to be a factor for a good half dozen jobs by the time the coaching carousel stops this season. I think that he might end up jumping off that carousel at some point. I think that this is the season that Mike Leach has been aiming for. I think he's got that air raid offense going. I like Mississippi State in this game. Obviously, you got to kind of like them straight up. The lines between 1 and 2. So, it's almost a money line play as much as it is a point spread play.
That's right.
I like Mississippi State at home in this one to really kind of ding Lane Kiffin potentially on the way out of Oxford.
Yeah, that's a fun game to think about. One of my favorite rivalries for sure. Iron Bowl, Alabama and Auburn. Auburn's one of those teams that I need a really good reason to go against it at home, and its recent track record, especially when you're talking about away games, doesn't do much to change my mind about what Auburn can be at Jordan-Hare Stadium. But it's actually the Alabama side of this I find more fascinating right now because we saw Ohio State last week, and then with the Purdue game the week before that, start to really look the part of a playoff contender and a national championship contender after kind of sleepwalking a little bit through some of the previous weeks. Alabama hasn't really flipped that switch as of yet. And they've also lost the last 2 times they've been to Auburn. But the toughest thing for me about handicapping this game is that thought that Alabama has a gear, but they haven't really found that gear yet this season, and this is the regular season finale. So there's a part of me that just kind of assumes that they're just not going to get there, and that when you talk about a huge spread, I believe BetUS has this at 19.5. I know earlier in the week that's where it was at BetUS.
It is 19.5.
Yeah, 19.5. That's a lot of points for me, David, and that's enough for me to take Auburn plus the points right here. I'd be shocked if Auburn were to win the game. But Alabama has not been a cover machine as of late, including last Saturday against Arkansas. I think Auburn at home is worth a strong look.
I agree with you completely. We've talked about it a couple times in previous appearances. Jordan-Hare Stadium's a weird place to play, and nobody knows that better than Nick Saban in Alabama. Obviously, the kick six happened down there. The game that didn't matter happened down there. Alabama losing in the Iron Bowl and then winning the national title. It's a weird place to play. Alabama's 2-6 against the spread in their last 8 games at Auburn. The home team's also 4-0 in the last 4, so it certainly favors the home team here. Look, Alabama's offense borders on great. Their defense borders on lousy, and I think LSU really exploited that, and so too last week at Arkansas, in which Alabama couldn't stop anything, and really they kind of just had to outscore them to the end. I like Auburn in the points here. I think Alabama wins this game, but I think Auburn with 19.5 points in your pocket, that's a good bet to make.
Yeah, last one I want to talk to you about, and this is a game that's been made more interesting by the recent week's worth of results. That's South Carolina hosting Clemson. Still a pretty big spread, 11.5. Clemson actually starting to figure some things out, handled Wake Forest easily a week ago. They're also getting a little healthier here right now. There's a part of me that would like for this game to be close. I think it'd be fun if the SEC team were to stand up here. Do you have a thought on Beamer's ability to surprise folks once again after getting the outright win against Auburn a week ago, also beat Florida in surprising fashion a couple weeks before that? Now it seems less surprising because Florida's turned out not to be very good. But nonetheless, what are the chances that he could pull some more magic out in a very loud stadium, tough environment, find a way to make things tough on Clemson on Saturday?
Much like the previous game we talked about, beware of the live home dog. South Carolina getting 11.5 at home in a night game. That stadium will be fueled and 100 proof by 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. And of all the years that South Carolina could get Clemson, this is like the dream opportunity. Clemson is 8-3, yes, but down as much as they've been in the last 8 or 10 years. Yes, South Carolina's just 6-5. Yes, South Carolina's 5-1 against the spread this year. I think you throw all that out. I love what Beamer's doing at South Carolina. I thought they looked great in their last 2 meetings. I'm surprised they're getting 11.5 points. Give me the road dog again here with that 11.5, and I'm going to take it to the bank.
That's very interesting. Good stuff, David, as per usual. And speaking of good stuff, BetUS got that for you there as well. You've been hearing us talk about it all season long, and now's your chance to take advantage of it. Big incentive when you get signed up for the very first time, BetUS.com. The promo code SEC125. You're going to get that 125% initial sign-up bonus. What that means is, just pick a number. You put $100 in your account, they're going to put $125 in your account. They're going to put more money in your account to start than you're going to put in there. You're already a winner before you place your first bet. That is exactly what you want from our friends at BetUS. So make sure you check that out right now. BetUS.com. Use the promo code SEC125, and then you take advantage of your expertise or take advantage of David's expertise and make some money on these picks here this weekend. David, as I said before, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for some great insight on some fun rivalry games. We'll look forward to talking to you about some championships here coming up very soon as well.
My pleasure. Happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Good stuff there, David Watson from BetUS. We have now got our good friend Pat Dooley ready to go here, so we'll talk to him about the Florida coaching search. We'll get that going. Also, big rumor coming out about the LSU coaching job. We will find that out for you there as well. And a big announcement about SEC Country Live before we're done today. So we got a lot to do and a lot to figure out before we are finished with today's program. So we'll kind of cover all of that. Missouri coach Eli Drinkwitz has had some more fun at the expense of the former Florida coach Dan Mullen. So we'll talk more about that coming up here in just a little bit too. Getting ready for the SEC Championship next Saturday, talking about some SEC rivalries here this weekend. Cliff Scoggins says he feels like that Alabama owns the referees, so he feels like Iron Bowl is going to go the Crimson Tide's way, and maybe he means the SEC Championship there as well. So that's always a hot topic. Antonio Freeman checks in to say 55-45, Alabama wins the Iron Bowl. Boy, can you imagine that high scoring of an Iron Bowl? That's a very interesting prediction rolling in on that. Isaac Berry also checking in over-under on the Egg Bowl. Yeah, I don't really know what the posted total is on that. Obviously, you could expect a lot of points, and you clearly have a couple of very big personalities on both sides of this with Kiffin and Leach. It's fun to have that game back on Thanksgiving night. Obviously, a very, very big rivalry and one of the bigger stories to follow here in the SEC here this weekend. But speaking of big stories around the SEC, Gainesville, Florida is certainly the site of one of those, and a guy who's been covering big stories around the Florida program for a long time is Pat Dooley. You remember him from the Gainesville Sun. He does a great podcast now, and he's good enough to spend some of his time here on the day before Thanksgiving with us here on SEC Country Live. Pat, I appreciate you making some time for us, and I hope you're getting ready for a happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no, it's I've never really been a big Thanksgiving guy, only because there's always been Florida FSU that weekend. So, we were always busy working through it. But now that I'm semi-retired, but I am doing a lot of work, still a lot of writing and stuff, and radio and podcasts and everything. So, I actually did my Friday podcast today, so I can take the whole weekend off.
Go. That's very nice. And obviously there is Florida State this weekend, but it's a little bit different version of that game than maybe you would have thought there at the beginning of the season. How did it go so wrong so fast for Dan Mullen to now be out there in Gainesville? Can you just kind of give us the thumbnail sketch of how it happened so fast?
Well, I don't think anybody can give you the thumbnail sketch because we're a lot of us are still trying to figure out exactly what went wrong, but I think and this is just a theory, and it's shared by some people that I think know football pretty well, that we've talked this over. And I think really the win over Georgia last year kind of gave him a false sense of who he was. And it also he got to that point where I don't need to recruit. I can take guys from the transfer portal, mix them in with whatever recruits want to come here, and I'll make them great, because I'm that good a coach. And I think his ego got in his way. And so when he got to that point, I think he got a little lazy with recruiting. He had that show cause against him, which certainly didn't help. But you also had a lot of other things going on here. I mean, there were guys not playing in games that weren't hurt, but they said they were begging off of playing in games. And there was a lot going on that was not good, that was kind of behind the scenes that is going to slowly come out. Nothing nefarious. I mean, it's all, things that happen in college football programs sometimes. But in Florida, when they happen, the floor tends to be lower. it's almost like at a school like this, at a program like this, it's either win the championship or bust. So bust, they take bust literally. They go, well, we only need to win 4 or 5 games now.
That's certainly a very apt description of how things seem to play out. When you look at what's next, there's been some online chatter that maybe Florida's aggressive in trying to go after a guy like Billy Napier, maybe under the belief that Virginia Tech's trying to do the same thing. Obviously, he's had success there in Louisiana Lafayette. Do you get the sense that Napier is the guy they've targeted above everybody else for this potential job?
Yeah, I do. I don't know that it to be 100% true. I mean, there's a lot out there, that on the internet that you just you can't take it all too seriously because a lot of it's just bull, to be honest with you. And I've been through this before. That's the one thing that's great about Robbie, Andrew, and myself both leaving on December 1st and taking the buyout from Gannett. We don't have to worry about this coaching search, but we still keep our ear to the ground. We still do it, do a lot of other things. So we are curious more than anything. But yeah, everything I'm hearing is that that he's their number one target, and they'll probably. But I mean, I don't think they'll announce anything before he's got a big game with Louisiana Monroe, and then of course Florida FSU. I think it would take a lot away from things. So that's not the usual way they do it. When they finally, my gut is that if it is Napier, and I don't really see a better candidate out there. If it is Napier, then I would say it'll probably be Sunday, and that's when they'll fly him in and sign the agreement.
So I'm of the belief that Florida is kind of a traditional program, however you want to define that. And to me, it seems like that maybe Florida would never really view itself as wanting to be in the Lane Kiffin business. That's a name that a lot of folks who watch this show would ask about. Why not Lane Kiffin for a place like Florida? That doesn't seem very Florida to me, but you also know more about Gainesville than I do. So do you think a guy like Kiffin would have ever been a consideration for Florida, or do you think that maybe Kiffin's just got his eyes on other places?
Well, I think Kiffin is a guy you at least had to think about, and whether you inquired to his agent about it or not, I don't know if that's the case. I do agree with you. He doesn't seem like a very Florida guy. He's the guy who used to take cheap shots at Florida when he was at Tennessee. But I will say this. There is no evidence that Lane Kiffin can recruit. I mean, and that's what Florida's got to have, a guy who really takes recruiting seriously, has a plan. And if they don't, you can't win unless your head coach is your best recruiter. And that's where Florida has failed with Dan Mullen. I mean, he just didn't care that much about it. So now, with bringing in Lane Kiffin, okay, yeah, he's really good at X's and O's. He's really good at calling up plays. I mean, he's been successful, but he's never been a good recruiter. Right now, their class is ranked very low, and with all this success. So I think in the end, I don't think Scott Strickland, who the AD now, would say, I'm going to go get a guy who has not shown he can recruit. That's what you just had. You had a great play caller who wasn't much of a recruiter, and now you're going to get another one. It doesn't make any sense to me.
No, I think that's a fair point. Pat, we appreciate your time on our show today. As you mentioned before, you are doing a great podcast right now that's keeping folks up to date on everything that's going on. For the Florida fans who are listening to us right now and want to check in on that, how can they find what you're doing?
Yeah, it's up. It's up Friday. It's up every Monday. And then all the app platforms, Google and everything like that. It's called Another Duly Noted Podcast. We got great guests. On Monday we had Doug Johnson and Noah Brandeis, who architected that big win over Florida State back in '97. So we have fun with it. We have a good time, a lot of contests and stuff like that. So it's going good, and I'm still doing radio 5 days a week and doing a lot of writing for different websites. So having fun.
That's great to hear. Well, enjoy your weekend, and thanks for your time here today, and we'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to speak with you soon there as well.
Yeah, anytime. Sorry I was late. I forgot my phone. I had to drive all the way home and get it. But for you guys, I did.
Well, I appreciate that, Pat. Thanks so much. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Okay, buddy.
Good stuff there for the Pat Dooley, keeping his ear to the ground on what's going on there at the University of Florida, the coaching search. And you hear Pat say kind of in no uncertain terms that, right now it looks like Billy Napier is the guy that Florida's targeted and the belief that he's going to bring some recruiting infrastructure that just simply wasn't in place. Also interesting to point out, and I believe if you look at the current recruiting rankings, Ole Miss is like 12th out of the 14 SEC schools in the current like 24/7 sports composite team rankings among SEC schools there. Pat saying there's really no proof right now that Kiffin is a great recruiter, and that may be one of the knocks on him for a job like this, is that Florida, after kind of getting it wrong from a recruiting standpoint under Jim McElwain and then again under Dan Mullen, can't afford to make that mistake for a third consecutive time. I think that's pretty interesting. And, of course, the game that will ultimately be remembered as the last for Dan Mullen at Florida was the loss to Missouri this past week. And there was obviously a lot of backstory here that I don't know got enough attention going into the game. These two teams playing a year ago and the brawl that occurred there at halftime, I thought that Dan Mullen played a role in inciting that, making it worse than otherwise could have been. And then after the Florida win there a year ago, shows up at the post-game press conference dressed like Darth Vader. A lot of folks did not like that. Apparently one of the guys that did not like that was Missouri coach Eli. Yeah, there you go. There's Mullen dressed like Darth Vader a year ago. That's just a pretty odd thing for a coach to do, and it's the kind of thing that Dan Mullen just seemed to do way too much of during his time there at the University of Florida. Well, it's an unforgettable image, and Drinkwitz was also one of the guys that simply didn't forget that. So when Missouri beat Florida this past week at the end of his own press conference, Eli Drinkwitz was ready with a troll, and you may have seen this, but it's still really funny. This is Eli Drinkwitz from Saturday. All right, let's hear this one more time.
May the force be with you.
Yeah, so there's Drinkwitz, gives you the May the Force be with you. My favorite part of the thing is the way that he kind of like tilts the, what I'm sure is like sugar-free soda, tilts that back. He's very proud of himself, walking out the door. It's a pretty substantial troll of Dan Mullen in Florida, and apparently Drinkwitz is not done. Still taking a little bit of a victory lap about the win against Florida. In fact, made an appearance this week on a sports radio station in Jacksonville, 1010 XL down there. Was asked about, why he did what he did to celebrate the win against Florida. Obviously, he was bothered by the Dan Mullen behavior from a year ago. This is Matt Hayes, veteran college ball writer, who shares this with us about Drinkwitz on his program, saying, "My father was a farmer. There's an old saying that you reap what you sow. If you sow kindness, you reap kindness. If you sow jackass, you reap jackass." So essentially, Eli Drinkwitz says Dan Mullen's jackass, and that's why he didn't have any kind of problem giving the lightsaber celebration there with that from Florida last week. So clearly the final moment of the Dan Mullen era is not a glorious one, but for Eli Drinkwitz, it's the kind of thing he's feeling really pretty good about himself on. So pretty funny stuff there too. I also promised you this as we get ready to bring this show to a close. A little bit of a coaching rumor coming out of the LSU ranks here for a moment. Bruce Feldman among those, writing about Kentucky coach Mark Stoops. Stoops has been with the Wildcats, and he really is, in a lot of ways, what Dan Mullen used to be. The coach in the SEC that just finds a way to do more with less. That's always the thing that Mullen had around him when he was at Mississippi State, and yet going to Florida, the chance to do more with more, he showed himself not quite be capable of that. Well, that's also been kind of the way in which Mark Stoops has been pigeonholed, and maybe that kind of thing can only last for so long. All of a sudden now, Stoops, who's really, for Kentucky standards, a pretty good recruiter, and at one point in time, the top 25 here this season, finished in the top 15 as recently as 2018, and maybe now a target for LSU, who obviously is getting ready to watch the Ed Orgeron era come to an end. Let me show you Bruce Feldman here on Twitter on the subject of Mark Stoops, saying that Kentucky's Mark Stoops beat Florida and LSU this year. He's won at a place that only won more than 8 games 4 times in the previous 100 years prior to that, that hearing some buzz out of LSU that he's a strong candidate there. Now, there are a lot of reasons why this maybe makes some sense for LSU. This is a program that's been chaotic. The last 3 coaches that have coached there have all won national championships, but in the aftermath of Nick Saban leaving LSU for the Miami Dolphins job, the Les Miles era was kind of always just kind of an erratic year-to-year performance, both on and off the field. The Ed Orgeron era, kind of the same way, although the 2019 LSU team might be one of the greatest teams I've ever seen. It might be the greatest team I've ever seen. But capitalizing on that success is something that Orgeron found very difficult to do, if not impossible. So you need a stabilizer. There's nothing that stabilizes a program more than a guy like Mark Stoops, who is not the most exciting guy in the world, but certainly the kind of guy who, if you need to be buttoned up, if you need to be professional, if you need to provide that look, it seems like Stoops might be able to provide that. I don't know how excited LSU fans are going to be about this. They seem to like a little bit more pizzazz than what a guy like Stoops brings to the table. But nonetheless, that is the rumor that's out there right now. This is not a rumor. This is a report, and I can tell you this, that we're going to have a very fun show next week. I'm so excited about this. A lot of you who've been with us for years are well aware that at one point in time, we had a co-host on the show, Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American, terrific player, a great analyst, and just a fun guy to work with. Well, Mike has since gone into coaching. Mike's doing a great job in that world now, and really he's an up-and-coming name to know in the coaching ranks. Well, next week, Mike, though, is going to return back to his old stomping ground. He's going to be with us here on SEC Country Live. It's a perfect show to do. Mike's an Alabama grad. I'm a big Georgia fan. We'll go head-to-head over the SEC championship. We'll talk about the LSU coaching stuff, the Florida coaching stuff. So if you know folks who've been with us for years, let them know that Mike Johnson's going to be back here on the show next week, and that's just going to be a fun, special event to do before the SEC championship. So next Wednesday at 3 p.m., we'll get ready to do that with Mike, and I'm really excited about being able to welcome him in as a part of SEC Country Live next week. Really, really looking forward to doing that. So that'll be Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time for SEC Country Live. For now, though, we're thinking about turning our attention to the Thanksgiving weekend. And, of course, for all of you, hope you're getting ready to have a good time. And we like to close our show out on kind of a good time, good note there as well. Really good stuff. A lot of you know Joey Molinaro. He's kind of occupying the space that, who's the guy that did the John Madden stuff and all that kind of stuff for years? He's kind of creeping in on that space there as well. He's done some very funny Nick Saban impersonations a while, and he even put together a recent video of Saban hosting his own Friendsgiving event, both with Saban and some other voices that you probably recognize here a little bit. So SEC LOL to kind of take us out the door, a little bit of a reenactment about what a Thanksgiving might look like around Nick Saban's household. This is pretty funny stuff from Joey Molinaro. Take a look at this.
Hi, well, I just want to say thanks again for being here today. I know I'm not the most friendly person in the world, but I am working on it. All right, so thank y'all for being here, and we didn't come here to talk, we came here to eat, so cheers.
Coach, can I just say something before we get started here? Does it get much better than this? I mean, I really don't think it does. A Thanksgiving meal surrounded by friends and football conversation on top of it with one of the best to ever do it. I mean, I am just excited to be here tonight. There is no question.
All right, well, I appreciate that, Chris. Thanks again. Cheers.
Oh, wow! Pass me the gravy! I'm ready to eat!
Gus?
So you get an idea of how that goes. Look, Gus Johnson, look, Chris Collinsworth. You even saw the slide in from Collinsworth there at one point there as well. And the Saban impersonation really is pretty spot on. That's not an easy guy to impersonate, but the all right, that Saban kind of gives as an addendum to a lot of his sentences. So pretty good stuff from Joey there on that. That's our SEC LOL here for today. And hope all of you, whoever you're getting ready to be with, friends, family, whatever else, hope you're getting ready to enjoy a great Thanksgiving. Certainly we're thankful for all of you who tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time for SEC Country Live here on both Facebook and YouTube and all the other platforms, I guess, there as well. Hope you all enjoy yourself. We'll see you again next Wednesday, getting ready for the SEC Championship. Our buddy Mike Johnson back with us there as well, and we will look forward to seeing all of you there too on SEC Country Live. See you then. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.